The Zathar Empire had been a force of unmatched power for millennia. They had conquered countless worlds, crushed rebellions, and destroyed entire civilizations with the sheer might of their vast, technologically superior fleets. Their flagship, the Doombringer, was a symbol of invincibility, feared across the galaxy. No other species had come close to challenging their supremacy. With their massive warships and advanced weapons, the Zathar were convinced that nothing and no one could ever threaten their dominance. The Zathar were known for their ruthlessness. Their military was efficient, calculating, and brutal. The Empire had thrived on conquest, expanding across galaxies, leaving little room for anyone else. For centuries, their arrogance had gone unchallenged as they trampled over weaker civilizations, forcing them into submission or simply wiping them out. To the Zathar, the galaxy was their playground, and they were its unquestioned rulers. In the heart of the Zathar War Council, the supreme commander of the fleet, Lord Vralthar, looked down at the holographic display of the human galaxy. His expression was one of contempt. Humans were nothing more than a nuisance, a primitive species still struggling to leave their homeworld. They had no understanding of the vastness of the universe, no conception of what it meant to command fleets, to conquer. The Zathar had observed humanity's recent attempts at space exploration, but to Vralthar, these were little more than amusing attempts by an insignificant race. "They think they are ready for the stars," Vralthar muttered under his breath, his sharp eyes glinting. Pathetic. His fellow commanders around the table nodded in agreement, each one smug in their belief that the humans would soon bow before the might of the Zathar Empire. For centuries, no enemy had been able to stand against them. In their minds, humanity's feeble attempts at defending themselves were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. What they didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for something more than just survival. Hidden from the eyes of the Zathar, a human warship, the Sentinel, had been under development. Unlike any other ship humanity had created before, the Sentinel was a masterpiece of both human ingenuity and a combination of alien technologies, reverse-engineered and adapted to suit humanity's unique approach to warfare. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's refusal to be underestimated. The warship's design was built for versatility and adaptability. It didn't rely solely on brute force or raw power like the Zathar's fleet. Instead, the Sentinel had been crafted with an emphasis on intelligence and learning. It could adapt to enemy tactics, counterattack with precision, and outthink its opponents. The ship's AI was designed to evolve with each encounter, growing stronger and smarter with every battle it faced. But the Zathar had no idea that such a ship even existed. In fact, they weren't even aware that humanity had developed the capability to stand up to them. The Zathar's perception of humans was one of condescension. To them, humanity was just another fragile species too weak to pose a real threat to their empire. They dismissed the reports of human technological advancements as exaggerations or even fabrications. How could a species so young, so primitive, be capable of creating something that could stand against the might of the Zathar? As the Zathar fleet prepared to deal with the human problem, they were blind to the storm that was about to break upon them. They had never faced an enemy who combined sheer determination, adaptability, and innovation in such a way. They had never encountered humanity. And soon, they would realize the terrible mistake of underestimating this new player in the galaxy. The Zathar Empire's decision to target a small human colony on the outskirts of their territory was as predictable as it was brutal. The colony, located on a barren moon orbiting a distant star, was home to a few thousand civilians, mostly miners and researchers. To the Zathar, it was nothing more than an insignificant dot in the vast expanse of space, a perfect target to demonstrate their power and send a message to any who might consider defying their rule. As the Zathar fleet approached, their commanders were confident that this would be another easy victory. Their ships, sleek and imposing, moved through the void like a hammer ready to crush an ant. They had already wiped out countless other colonies and civilizations in similar fashion. What could possibly stand in their way? But what they didn't expect was the ship that would meet them head-on, the Sentinel. The warship was far more advanced than anything the Zathar had ever seen. As the Zathar fleet moved closer to the colony, the Sentinel emerged from the dark space between them, its sleek hull barely visible against the starry backdrop. At first, the Zathar thought it was just another human ship, perhaps a last-ditch attempt to delay the inevitable. They underestimated its significance, brushing it off as something unimportant. But when the Sentinel powered up its weapons, the entire Zathar fleet felt a wave of unease ripple through their ranks. Within moments, the humans demonstrated something the Zathar had never anticipated: true precision. The Sentinel launched a series of blistering attacks, targeting weak points in the Zathar ships with an accuracy that seemed almost impossible. Energy beams cut through enemy shields like they were paper, and missiles found their marks with ruthless efficiency. The Zathar fleet's heavy ships, designed for brute force, were ill-equipped to deal with such precision strikes. The Zathar commanders scrambled to adjust, ordering evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. The Sentinel had already calculated the best angles of attack and anticipated their moves. It adapted faster than the Zathar could think, each new assault more devastating than the last. Within minutes, the first wave of Zathar ships had been reduced to debris, their shattered pieces drifting helplessly in space. For the Zathar, this was no ordinary engagement. They had fought countless battles, but this was something new. The humans were not only fighting with advanced weapons, they were fighting with intelligence, with strategy, and most unsettling of all, they were fighting with something the Zathar had never seen before: creativity. The battle was far from over, but it was already clear that the humans were not going to fall easily. Their tactics were unlike anything the Zathar had encountered before. It wasn't just about sheer firepower, it was about exploiting weaknesses, thinking outside the box, and adapting to every turn the Zathar made. Back aboard the Zathar flagship, the Doombringer, Lord Vralfar watched in disbelief as his fleet faltered. He had expected a swift and decisive victory, but the humans were proving more resilient than he had ever imagined. Each time a Zathar ship fell, another human vessel appeared, reinforcing the Sentinel in a show of unity and strength. As the battle raged on, Vralfar's pride began to crumble. The humans weren't supposed to be this capable. They were supposed to be insignificant. But now, it was becoming painfully clear that this human warship was no fluke. It was a true threat, and it was dismantling the Zathar fleet piece by piece. In the midst of the chaos, one thing was certain: the Zathar had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake would cost them dearly. The battle continued to rage in the vastness of space, but it had become clear to the Zathar that this was no ordinary skirmish. The humans, despite their technological inferiority on paper, had turned the Sentinel into an unstoppable force. The Zathar fleet, once proud and overwhelming, was now in disarray. Ships that had once crushed entire civilizations in moments were now floundering, desperately trying to fight off an enemy they had believed would be a mere nuisance. Lord Vralfar seethed in frustration, pacing back and forth on the bridge of the Doombringer. His fleet, the strongest in the galaxy, was being dismantled by a single human warship. His officers whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the unfolding disaster. The commander's confidence was shattered, but his pride refused to allow him to admit defeat. "We cannot be bested by these primitives," Vralfar snarled. "We will crush them. They are weak. They must be weak." He slammed his fist on the control panel, signaling his fleet to regroup. "Rally the remaining ships. We will surround the Sentinel and bring it down. This fight ends today." Yet, as the fleet regrouped and made another attempt at encircling the human ship, something unsettling began to happen. The humans were adapting just as quickly as they were. The Sentinel, which had already disabled half of the Zathar's fleet, now switched tactics again. It evaded incoming fire, shifting unpredictably in the void, and then struck with even more precision. The Zathar tried to outflank the humans, but every time they adjusted their tactics, The Sentinel anticipated them with uncanny accuracy. It was as if the ship could read their moves before they made them. What made this even more perplexing was the human crew. They were not acting like a military force that relied solely on brute strength. The humans on board the Sentinel were focused, calculating, and disciplined, traits not commonly associated with the Zathar's idea of primitive species. It wasn't just their technology that was advanced, it was their minds. They thought differently, acted differently, and fought differently than any enemy the Zathar had ever faced. There was an ingenuity to their tactics, a raw creativity that caught the Zathar off guard at every turn. How is this possible? Lord Vralthar muttered, gripping his console as he watched another of his ships go down. The battle was now taking on the tone of a slaughter. The human warship didn't just fight with advanced weaponry. It fought with the knowledge that the Zathar never expected. The humans understood their weaknesses, exploited them, and forced the Zathar to play their game. The Zathar commander realized, too late, that humanity had not just stumbled upon an advantage. They had deliberately crafted one. The Zathar had assumed that their size and power were the deciding factors in every conflict. But the humans had already figured out that size alone meant nothing if you could outmaneuver your enemy at every step. The battle continued, but now the Zathar began to question their own supremacy. They had thrown everything at the Sentinel, from devastating blasts to powerful energy fields, and still the human ship remained standing, adapting and responding with relentless determination. At that moment, it hit Vralthar like a thunderclap. He had miscalculated the nature of the human threat. They weren't just fighting a warship, they were fighting a species that learned, adapted, and evolved. The more they faced the Zathar, the stronger they became. The humans were not just reacting to the Zathar's tactics, they were rewriting the rules of the battle itself. Lord Vralthar's mind raced. His empire had dominated for millennia because they had been unchallenged. But now, a simple human ship was showing him that their invincibility was nothing more than an illusion. In the deepest corners of his mind, a cold realization began to settle. The Zathar Empire was not invincible, and it was no longer a matter of if they would fall. It was a matter of when. The Zathar Empire, shaken but not yet broken, called for reinforcements. Lord Vralthar knew that the destruction of his fleet could not be seen as a mere setback. It was an insult, a blow to the very pride of the Zathar. He could not allow this human upstart to tarnish the reputation of his mighty empire. Every star system the Zathar controlled would hear of this defeat, and the mere thought of it sent a chill through Vralthar's bones. If they want war, they will have it, Vralthar growled, slamming his fist onto the console. Send the entire Third Fleet. Bring them all. The humans will regret their defiance. With his orders sent, the Zathar rallied a massive force. A fleet of thousands of ships, including the most formidable warships in the Empire, surged forward toward the human position. The Zathar were determined to destroy the Sentinel and wipe out the human threat once and for all. They knew that the previous losses were merely a fluke, the result of an unexpected encounter. This time, they would crush the humans under the weight of their sheer numbers. On the human side, the crew of the Sentinel was well aware that the battle they had won was just the beginning. They had no illusions about the Zathar's resolve. The first victory had been hard-earned, but now the stakes were higher. They were no longer fighting a single squadron. They were facing the might of an empire. But the crew of the Sentinel was unyielding. They had been forged in the fires of war, tempered by humanity's will to survive and conquer. Their ship was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of human ingenuity and unity. Captain Alina Ross, the commanding officer aboard the Sentinel, looked over the tactical display. Her face was calm, but the sharpness in her eyes revealed the weight of the situation. She turned to her crew, her voice steady, but filled with conviction. The Zathar think they can break us by overwhelming us with numbers. But they don't understand what makes humanity different. We don't fight the same way they do. We adapt. We think. And we never give up. As the Sentinel prepared for the incoming assault, the crew made quick adjustments. The ship's adaptive systems were already learning from previous encounters, and its AI was constantly recalculating the most effective strategies. In the moments before the Zathar fleet arrived, the Sentinel shifted into a more aggressive formation, its weapons primed and ready. The first wave of Zathar ships arrived, an imposing mass of firepower that stretched across the battlefield. The Zathar fired their first volley, massive energy beams ripping through the void. But the Sentinel was already moving, its sleek hull darting between the blasts with impossible agility. It wasn't just a ship, it was a puzzle the Zathar couldn't solve. No matter how many weapons they fired, they couldn't land a hit. The Zathar pressed forward, trying to close the distance, but they had underestimated one crucial factor: the Sentinel's ability to exploit the smallest weaknesses. With every shot that missed, the human ship struck back with pinpoint accuracy. A Zathar cruiser exploded as a missile punched through its weak spot, its shields failing in a flash of light. Then another ship and another fell before the unstoppable barrage from the Sentinel. But the Zathar were relentless. They kept coming, throwing wave after wave of ships at the human warship. They thought the weight of numbers alone would turn the tide. But the Sentinel had something they didn't: the ability to adapt in real time. The human ship learned from each encounter, figuring out the Zathar's next move before they even made it. With every Zathar ship that fell, the humans grew bolder, more confident. They were no longer merely defending themselves. They were taking the fight to the Zathar, striking at their fleet with surgical precision. The Zathar might have had numbers, but the humans had ingenuity. And that made all the difference. As the battle continued, Vralthar began to feel the crushing weight of his mistake. The Zathar Empire had always relied on its size and strength, never once considering the possibility that a smaller, more adaptable force could defeat them. But now it was undeniable. Humanity had found a way to overcome the overwhelming force of the Zathar. And as the remaining Zathar ships were slowly picked off one by one, the commander realized that this was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for the very future of his empire. The Zathar Empire was reeling. What had begun as a swift and decisive campaign to crush humanity had now spiraled into a disaster. Lord Vralthar, once so confident in his ability to control the galaxy, was now consumed by frustration and disbelief. His forces, despite their overwhelming numbers, were being systematically torn apart by a single human warship. The Zathar had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now they were paying the price. But as the Zathar reeled from their losses, something unexpected happened. The humans, fueled by their recent victories and bolstered by the resilience of the Sentinel, shifted their tactics. No longer content with merely defending their colonies or holding back the Zathar's advances, they took the fight directly to the heart of the enemy's empire. It began with a single daring strike against one of the Zathar's outermost fortress worlds, a heavily fortified planet deep within the empire's borders. The humans had learned a crucial lesson in the previous battles. The Zathar relied too heavily on their massive warships and their sense of invulnerability. The Sentinel was no longer just a symbol of resistance. It was the spearhead of a full-scale offensive. Captain Alina Ross stood at the helm, her eyes focused on the tactical display in front of her. The plan was simple but audacious. They would take the fight to the Zathar's capital world, Zathar Prime, and force the Empire to face the consequences of underestimating humanity. She had no illusions about how dangerous this mission would be, but the time had come for humanity to prove that they were no longer the weaklings of the galaxy. "We've done the impossible before. We can do it again," Captain Ross said, her voice steady and filled with resolve. She turned to her crew, who had proven time and time again that they were up to the challenge. "Get ready. We are going to Zathar Prime." With that, the Sentinel and its fleet of human ships, smaller, nimbler, and far more numerous than the Zathar had anticipated, began their journey toward the heart of the Empire. Along the way, they encountered more Zathar forces, and with each skirmish, the humans grew bolder. The Zathar, still reeling from their earlier losses, struggled to mount an effective defense. Their warships, despite their sheer firepower, were unable to keep up with the agile human ships that darted in and out of combat with precision. As the Sentinel made its way closer to Zathar Prime, the humans' plan became clear. They were not simply trying to defeat the Zathar in small engagements. They were preparing to strike a decisive blow that would shatter the Empire's confidence once and for all. Their target was the Zathar's most powerful weapon, the Ether Beam, a superweapon capable of wiping entire fleets off the map in a single strike. If the humans could disable it, they would cripple the Zathar's ability to fight back effectively. The Zathar had no idea what was coming. They believed the humans were merely playing defense, trying to salvage what little was left of their forces. They never imagined that the humans would have the audacity to take the fight to their doorstep. Lord Vralfar, observing the advancing human fleet, began to panic. His spies had reported strange activity near Zathar Prime, but he had dismissed it as insignificant. Now he saw the true threat of humanity. They were not simply defending themselves. They were striking at the very core of his empire. As he watched the Sentinel draw closer to the planet, Vralfar's mind raced. "They are coming for us," he said, his voice cold and trembling. "Prepare the defenses. We will not let them take Zathar Prime. We will destroy them here, once and for all." But even as he gave the order, the Zathar knew something they could not deny. They had underestimated the humans in a way that no one had thought possible. The battle for Zathar Prime would not be a simple victory, and for the first time in his life, Vralfar could not predict the outcome. The battle for Zathar Prime began with an intensity that would echo through history. Lord Vralfar, desperate to protect his capital, ordered every available warship to defend the planet. The Zathar fleet was vast, nearly double the size of any force humanity had faced before. But they were facing something they had never encountered. A species that was not only fighting to survive, but was now fighting to end the era of Zathar's supremacy. Captain Alina Ross stood at the command center of the Sentinel, her hands gripping the edge of the control panel. The air around her hummed with the tension of the upcoming confrontation. The full force of the Zathar fleet was about to bear down on them, but there was no turning back. Humanity had come too far to retreat now. "All ships, engage at maximum range. Stay close and work together. Do not let them surround us," Ross ordered, her voice calm but determined. She glanced at her crew, their faces set in grim resolve. They had already faced impossible odds. Now, they would face the ultimate test. As the Sentinel and the human fleet approached Zathar Prime, the massive Zathar warships appeared from behind the planet's moon, their sleek, deadly forms filling the space around them. Their weapons crackled to life as they launched the first wave of attacks. Massive energy beams designed to tear through anything in their path. But humanity was ready. The human ships, nimble and unpredictable, dodged and weaved in the vacuum of space, making it nearly impossible for the Zathar to land a direct hit. The Sentinel led the charge, its advanced shielding holding strong as it absorbed the first wave of fire. The Zathar fleet, large and intimidating, tried to surround the human forces, but the humans had already anticipated this. The Sentinel deployed drones that scattered in all directions, confusing the Zathar targeting systems and providing the human ships with critical openings. As the Zathar fired at the decoys, the human ships retaliated with precision strikes, hitting weak spots on the Zathar warships and crippling them one by one. "This is it," Ross whispered to herself. "We're going to break them." The tide of the battle shifted in humanity's favor as the Sentinel moved closer to the Zathar superweapon, the Ether Beam. It was a massive structure built into the heart of Zathar Prime's orbiting space station, a weapon capable of destroying entire fleets with a single shot. If the humans could destroy it, they would cripple the Zathar's ability to wage war for generations. The Zathar commanders began to panic as the human ships breached their defenses. Each Zathar warship that fell was a painful reminder of their arrogance, their assumption that their size and strength would be enough to win. But the humans weren't fighting a traditional war. They had learned, adapted, and overcome. "Activate the Aether Beam," Vralthar ordered, his voice tight with desperation. "We'll burn them from the sky." The Zathar's superweapon powered up, sending a wave of energy surging toward the Sentinel. The beam was devastating in its power, capable of disintegrating ships in an instant. But Captain Ross wasn't about to let that happen. At the last possible moment, the Sentinel twisted and darted out of the beam's path, narrowly avoiding the destructive force. It was a close call, but the Zathar had given the Sentinel the perfect opening. Ross's fingers flew over the controls, issuing commands faster than anyone thought possible. The human fleet regrouped and focused all their firepower on the Aether Beam station. A series of well-placed missiles detonated at the weapon's core, sending shockwaves rippling through the station. The station began to break apart, its massive structure crumbling under the force of the human assault. The Aether Beam flickered, then went silent as the core exploded. The Zathar's most powerful weapon had been destroyed. "No! No!" Vralthar screamed, watching helplessly as his most prized asset disintegrated before his eyes. His fleet was crumbling, and now the heart of the Zathar Empire was under threat. With the Aether Beam disabled, the Sentinel turned its attention to the remaining Zathar warships. The Zathar, though formidable in number, were no longer coordinated. The loss of the Aether Beam was a blow from which they could not recover. The humans, emboldened by their victory, began to pick off the remaining Zathar ships with clinical efficiency. It was clear, the tide had turned. Humanity had struck at the heart of the Zathar Empire, and they were winning. As the Sentinel and the human fleet tore through the remaining Zathar ships, Lord Vralthar was pushed to the edge of his sanity. His empire, once the most dominant force in the galaxy, was crumbling before his very eyes. Zathar Prime, the heart of his rule, was under assault, and the humans had proven themselves far more formidable than he ever could have imagined. His warships were falling one after another, each explosion a sharp reminder that the Zathar had underestimated humanity. His pride, once as invincible as the Empire itself, had been shattered. But despite the mounting losses, Vralthar refused to surrender. He would not let his empire fall so easily. "Prepare for a final counterattack," he barked, his voice dripping with fury. "We will not let these humans destroy everything we have built." The Zathar, though weakened, were not without resources. In their desperation, they activated their last reserve fleet, a handful of massive, experimental warships, designed for extreme combat scenarios. These ships, equipped with the most advanced technology the Zathar could muster, were their last hope to turn the tide. If they couldn't stop the human assault now, the Zathar Empire would fall forever. "These ships are our last line of defense," Vralthar muttered, his fingers trembling as he gave the order. The Zathar fleet, battered and scattered, began to regroup around the new, experimental warships. They formed an almost impenetrable wall, their combined firepower more than enough to tear apart any human vessel that dared to approach. On board the Sentinel, Captain Ross watched the Zathar fleet reorganize, their final stand apparent. The advanced Zathar warships were enormous, their weaponry unlike anything humanity had faced so far. The stakes had never been higher. One wrong move, and the human fleet could be wiped out in an instant. "Listen up, everyone," Ross said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've been through a lot, but this is it. The Zathar aren't going to stop. We need to hit them hard and fast, or we'll be the ones on the receiving end of their last-ditch attack. Stay focused, stay coordinated. This ends today." With that, the humans sprang into action. The remaining ships of the human fleet regrouped, their advanced AI systems working in perfect harmony with their human crews. They would not let the Zathar hold the line. Captain Ross knew they had one advantage. The Zathar, for all their power and size, still underestimated the human ability to think outside the box. It was time to turn the tables once again. As the Sentinel led the charge, its weapons lighting up the void of space, the Zathar launched their counteroffensive. Massive energy beams shot from the experimental warships, each strike powerful enough to obliterate any human ship in its path. But the human fleet, nimble and quick, darted through the firestorm with a level of coordination that left the Zathar reeling. Captain Ross had expected this move. The Zathar were relying on sheer power and brute force, trying to crush the human fleet with overwhelming firepower. But the humans had learned to fight smarter, not harder. The Zathar's massive warships, though imposing, were slow and lumbering. The human ships had the advantage in speed and agility. As the Sentinel danced through the Zathar's laser fire, it deployed a series of countermeasures. Drones and decoys scattered across the battlefield, confusing the Zathar targeting systems and drawing their fire away from the human ships. In the chaos, the Zathar's precision faltered. One by one, the Zathar's experimental ships began to fall as the Sentinel and its fleet targeted their weak points. The Zathar's final stand was crumbling. Each new victory by the humans was a hammer blow to the once invincible Zathar Empire. But Vralfar would not admit defeat. His teeth clenched as he watched his ships fall. His desperation fueled him to give one final command, a self-destruct sequence on the remaining ships. "They will not take us without a cost," Vralfar seethed. "Activate the self-destruct protocols on all remaining vessels. Let the humans know they will never completely defeat us." But Captain Ross, ever vigilant, had anticipated such a move. As the Zathar ships began to flash their imminent self-destruction warnings, the Sentinel and its fleet swiftly pulled back, avoiding the massive explosions that followed. As the dust settled in the wake of the Zathar's last attempt to retain some semblance of power, Vralfar stared in disbelief. His empire had been dismantled by a species he once considered insignificant. The final blow had been dealt, and the Zathar Empire, once the terror of the galaxy, was on the verge of collapse. The final explosions from the Zathar fleet lit up the vast expanse of space like dying stars. One by one, the once feared warships that had ravaged countless systems throughout the galaxy were now nothing more than debris, drifting into the void. The Sentinel, battered but unbroken, hovered above Zathar Prime, its systems humming with energy. The battle was over. The Zathar Empire, in all its might, had been defeated. Captain Alina Ross stood silently on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the burning remnants of the Zathar ships scattered across space. The victory had come at a heavy cost, but humanity had emerged victorious, proving to the galaxy that no empire, no matter how powerful, could survive forever. She exhaled slowly, the weight of the war finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. "We did it," Lieutenant Parker said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Ross turned toward her crew, her expression one of weary pride. It wasn't just the Sentinel that won this war. It was all of us. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer. We fought as one, and that's why we're still here. The human fleet had suffered losses, but not nearly as many as the Zathar. The victory was not only a testament to humanity's will to survive, but also to their ability to adapt and outsmart a seemingly unstoppable foe. They had turned the tide with sheer determination, ingenuity, and unity. The Zathar, who had once believed themselves invincible, were now nothing more than a shadow of their former glory. On the surface of Zathar Prime, the Zathar capital was in ruins. Once a gleaming jewel of advanced technology and architectural wonder, the city was now a war-ravaged wasteland. The Zathar had fought fiercely to defend their home, but their pride had blinded them. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, and in doing so had sealed their own fate. Lord Vralfar, the once mighty leader of the Zathar Empire, was now a broken figure, captured by the humans, and held aboard the Sentinel. He stood in the break, staring out of the small window, watching as the remnants of his empire disintegrated into space. He had always believed that the Zathar were the superior species, destined to rule the galaxy forever. Now, as he gazed out at the wreckage of his fleets, he realized just how wrong he had been. They fought with nothing but their will to survive, Vralfar muttered bitterly to himself. How could I have been so blind? Ross entered the break, her footsteps echoing on the metal floor. She stood in front of the Zathar leader, her eyes unwavering. "You underestimated us," she said simply. "That was your mistake. You thought we were weak, that we couldn't stand against your power. But humanity isn't about brute force. We fight with our minds, our creativity, and our hearts. And that's what won this war." Vralthar glared at her, his pride still unbroken despite the fall of his empire. "You may have won today, but you cannot defeat the Zathar spirit. We will rise again." Ross shook her head. "Maybe, but not anytime soon. The galaxy has changed. The Zathar Empire is done. And humanity is no longer a footnote in history. We are a force to be reckoned with." As the Sentinel made its way toward the remnants of Zathar Prime, Ross turned to her crew, her voice filled with resolve. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We've shown the galaxy what we're capable of. Now we rebuild. We forge a new future, not as the underdogs, but as the leaders of a new era." The human fleet, once considered small and weak, had now proven itself as a dominant force in the galaxy. They had defeated an empire that had lasted for millennia. They had shattered the myth of Zathar invincibility, and in doing so, they had shown the universe that humanity would no longer be underestimated. With the Zathar Empire broken and its remnants scattered across the stars, a new chapter in galactic history was beginning. The age of humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again.